Welcome back to our study on the Gospel of Mark. We're now in lesson 4 and we are beginning in chapter 7. Before we get started on this, I want to just show you where we are now, where Mark left Jesus last chapter. He was here in Gennesaret, okay, right here. And although Mark doesn't say, other Gospels indicate that at this point in the journey, they went from Gennesaret to Capernaum. Now down here you can see the scale. Here is 0 to 12 miles. You can see the scale. So this looks like it was maybe 4 miles, maybe 3. So not too far from Gennesaret to Capernaum. Okay. I want to also look back a little bit last week when we talked about the crowd of the 5,000. I told you it was almost miraculous that Jesus was able to disperse this crowd. And I want to just tell you a little bit more about that crowd. That crowd was mainly made up of 5,000 men. There were women and children, but they were evidently stalking Jesus. They were running toward him. You know, we talked about paparazzi last lesson. They were wanting to make him king. This was told us in John. If you go to John chapter 6, starting with verse 22, you can read about that. John goes through this discourse that Jesus had with them in the area of Capernaum. Okay, so right now, we are beginning now in chapter 7 of Mark, with Jesus having yet another altercation with the Pharisees. Now, these Pharisees and teachers of the law were from Jerusalem. And they were looking for something, for anything, with which to accuse Jesus, to get rid of him. All right, so this is where we are. Verse 1, the Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. Now, your question number 1 was, what problems do these religious leaders of the Jews notice about Jesus' disciples at this time? Well, that was it. They weren't washing according to the tradition. Verse 4, when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. Okay, now their issue, I don't really like people, especially my family, coming to the dinner table without washing their hands either. But this is not for hygienic purposes. This is a ceremonial washing. So their tradition had them wash their hands a certain way, and it was all in this tradition of the elders. So what is that? What are these purification laws? The tradition of the elders had lots of different laws, like over 600, that were in addition to the law that God gave Moses. I got this from McGarvey's The Fourfold Gospel. The Pharisees held that these traditions, these oral additions to the law, were revealed to Moses along with the law and were communicated by him orally to the elders of the people. So they were handed down directly from Moses. That's what they told the people. But Jesus is actually going to refute that with what Moses actually said. So, remember now, Jesus has been questioned on these traditions before. Remember when the disciples were plucking corn, and they ate it on the Sabbath? Okay, remember when he was at the home of Matthew eating with sinners? And also when he was healing in the synagogue on the Sabbath. You remember? Okay, now they have noticed this, and they are absolutely positive that they have him now. All right, so the Pharisees and teachers of the law, verse 6, asked Jesus, "Why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders instead of eating their food with defiled hands?" He replied, "Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites." He's calling them hypocrites. "As it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules." Now, this was from the prophet Isaiah, hundreds of years before. And he was prophesying about what was happening right then with these Pharisees and teachers of the law. "You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions." You'll find this in Isaiah 29, verse 13. Okay. Now, you notice that Jesus did not deny their charge, did he? They had not washed ceremonially, with not their hands, and they probably had come from the marketplace. But what he does do is justify his disciples, their actions, by attacking the whole traditional system. Okay? So Jesus answers with this quote from Isaiah. They were destroying the influence of God's law with these traditions. So what did he charge them with? He charged them with hypocrisy. Hypocrisy here is teaching as fundamental law what is in fact only human custom rather than divine revelation. They were saying that these human oral tradition laws were more important than God's law that he gave Moses. Jesus continues in verse 9, "You have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. For Moses said, 'Honor your father and mother.'" It's the fifth of the 10 Commandments. That was your question too. What law from the 10 Commandments did Jesus use as an example of the Pharisees setting aside the commands of God in order to observe their own traditions? And this command says, "Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." This is from Exodus 20, verse 12. He also goes on with another quote from the law of Moses that God handed down to him. "Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death." You'll find this in Exodus 21:15, Exodus 21:17. Verse 15 says, "Anyone who attacks their father or mother is to be put to death." And then 17 is, "Anyone who curses their father or mother is to be put to death." Okay. But you say that if anyone declares that what might have been used to help their father or mother is Corban, that is devoted to God. Now, Corban, we would say something set aside for God. Continuing with verse 12, then, since you're telling them they have to set this aside, then you no longer let them do anything for their mother or father, their father or mother. Thus, you nullify the word of God by your tradition that you have handed down. And you do many things like that. Okay, so in other words, the Jews had created a loophole. You know what a loophole is? For the fifth commandment by declaring that everything they might use to honor their God was korban, devoted to God. So it made it impossible for people to honor their father and mother and take care of them like they were supposed to do. This teaching nullified, these traditions nullified God's law, one of the 10 commandments. All right, so there were cases where other cases too, where these oral traditions made it absolutely impossible to carry out the law of the 10 commandments. It's shocking. And notice all of these commands were from Moses. So if Moses had handed these oral traditions down, he would be contradicting himself as well, wouldn't he? Contradicting God and contradicting himself. Moses would not have done that. All right. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him. Now, the Pharisees and teachers of the law were there, and Jesus calls the crowd. He wanted them to come over. Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. And then he says, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. That is verse 16. A lot of versions do not have verse 16. The older ones do, like King James, New King James. But I found out it's because some of the later manuscripts that they found do not have this. So some versions have taken it out, some versions have left it in. I like to leave it in. Why? Well, he wanted them to understand this. And it was a new teaching for all these people, all these Jews, that nothing outside a person can defile them. That's what they'd always been taught. But there's this rabbi that's telling us, no, it's just the opposite. What comes out of you defiles you. And because he says, if anyone has ears to hear, let him hear, you remember that we have talked about that before. It's when he's giving a kingdom lesson that he talks about this. He wants them to have kingdom ears and kingdom eyes. Now, after he had left the crowd, verse 17, and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. Now, why did they call it a parable? Well, it's because it's a picture. Something going in your mouth and coming out of your mouth. Okay? Things that defile are not what things that are going in, but things that are coming out. So, the disciples they needed some clarification on this. So this was weird. So it doesn't defile you if it goes in, but when you throw it up, I can just see their minds working. I don't understand. What are you talking about? Because that's just gross. Okay. Are you so dull? Verse 18, he asked, don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach, and then out of the body. Now, I'm not going to deal with the parenthesis right now, but I will. He went on, what comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, and folly. All these evils come from inside and defile a person. All right, let's go back just a little bit. Verse 18, are you so dull? He's expecting now the disciples to begin understanding a little bit better and a little bit quicker. The lessons here, your actions, good or evil. Now, Jesus was focusing on evil, but your actions, is good or evil, come from within you. Jesus calls it your heart, the place it comes from. And verse 21 says, if there is evil there, it affects your whole being. It's from within. Okay? Every outward act of sin is preceded by an inward act of choice. Isn't that true? Now, this is a kingdom teaching that Jesus is doing. Who is the only cure for the heart of humanity? It's Jesus, isn't it? Jesus is preaching the kingdom. Remember our study of Romans? Who has sinned? All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But the Jews and even the disciples, they did not get this. Why? They were the chosen ones. They were the chosen ones. They didn't have to worry about that. The Gentiles did. They were the lost ones. But I want you to think of something. Remember when the disciples went on their trip and they healed the sick, they drove out demons? What was their message to the people? Do you remember that? It was to repent. Repent of what? I mean, that was John the Baptist's message as well, and people were repenting. So why are we repenting? Because we're the chosen ones. None of the people, not the teachers, not the people, not the disciples, they didn't want to hear this kind of message. It was too confusing. It was different and it was new. Therefore, their ears were deaf, their eyes were blind. These kingdom messages were upsetting people. They were upsetting the leaders. Now, verse 19, this parenthesis, I want you to think about who's reading this. Who's reading this gospel? We're reading it, aren't we? Were the people back then reading it? No, it hadn't been written yet. It wasn't written till like 25, 30 years later. So Christians are reading this gospel. It was the first gospel written. So this parenthesis was for them. Let's read it. In saying this, all right, let's read that. For it doesn't go into their heart, but into their stomach and then out of the body. They're not defiled by something that goes into the body. In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. And what Mark is saying, yes, he declared them clean, but he also abolished the difference, one of the major differences in a Jew and a Gentile. There was circumcision, yes, but these purification laws, these cleanliness laws about food, They separated Jew and Gentile. So now, when they're reading this, Jew and Gentile, there is no difference. There is no difference. Okay? They are all one in Christ Jesus. Let's move on to verse 34. Question 3. Who came to Jesus in Tyre, and what did she want? Okay, we'll get to it in a second. Jesus left that place. Let's go to a map. So he was around Capernaum, right here. He left that place and he went to the vicinity of Tyre. Tyre is way up here. Okay, it's in Phoenicia. Is this a Jewish area? No, it's not. It's a Gentile area. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know it, yet he could not keep his presence secret. Now, why was he not wanting anybody to know where he was? All right, well, first of all, time is getting short. The final Passover for him is drawing near. Now, it's not right there yet. He's still got a few more months, but he needs privacy. He needs privacy to teach his disciples what they need to know. Also, he needs to escape this constant observation of him by the Pharisees and teachers of the law, and of Herod. Herod was king, and he was hearing about this Jesus, remember, and he was none too happy about it. So it's not like Jesus was hiding, but he needed to be in a more private place to talk to his disciples. All right, so this Greek woman comes to him. 25, verse 25. In fact, as soon as she heard about him, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an impure spirit came and fell at his feet. All right, it's thought that he went to this house. Well, everybody knew he was there. So he just leaves. And this woman, it's highly doubtful that she would have been able to gain entrance into this house. So it's thought that as Jesus was walking along with his disciples, this woman comes and falls at his feet, and she begged him to heal her little daughter. Now, in other Gospels, she calls him the Son of David. She knows who she is, and she may even know that he had a soft spot for little children. I don't know. She asked him to heal her little girl who had this impure spirit in her. Okay. Verse 27. First, Jesus used, I want you to notice he uses first. First, let the children eat all they want, he told her, for it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. That sounds it's spiteful, doesn't it? Okay, but that he is not being spiteful here. All right, first of all, a dog back then, usually the dogs were outside, they roamed around and they were mangy dogs, but they did have these they would have little lap dogs, pets, like we would. And it was a custom then that the family always eats before they feed a little pet. The family comes first, and then the pet comes second. It's a subordinate kind of thing, okay? And you see where we're going with this. All right. The dog was loved in the household, and so look at the way he told her this. First, indicating what? That the Gentiles, yes, the Jews had to be first, but the Gentiles would have a turn. Okay? But let the children eat all they want. It's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Not yet. But she had her in now. She had her in. Lord, She replied, "Even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." And that was true. So then he told her, "For such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." The Jews had to be first, and then the Gentiles. But she had great faith, didn't she? I think Jesus liked her. Verse 30, she went home and found her child lying on the bed and the demon gone. So in Matthew 15:28, Jesus says, "Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted." I think it's very interesting that Jesus tells her she has great faith and she's a Gentile. Remember the Roman centurion, that Jesus was amazed at his faith, his great faith? Neither one of these Gentiles brought the sick person to Jesus. Did you notice that? Her little girl was at home. The centurion's servant was at home. But both of these people had such great faith that they knew that Jesus could heal from afar. In fact, I haven't really studied it, really looked into it, but these may be the only two instances where Jesus healed from afar. All right. Where were we? All right. Verse 31. Then Jesus left the vicinity of Tyre. Okay, here we are. We're in Tyre, right here. And went through Sidon. Now, Sidon's not down here. It's up there. He's in Tyre, and he goes up to the vicinity of Sidon, and then he goes down to the Sea of Galilee. He goes down this way, okay? Still going down. This is the Sea of Galilee right here, and he will be on the eastern side, over here where the Gentiles are, and into the region of the Decapolis, right down here. Now, we've been to the Decapolis before, haven't we, with Jesus? So question 4, where did Jesus and his disciples go after leaving Tyre? And we just went through all that. And what did Jesus do there? What did Jesus do there? Let's read. 32, there some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly talk, and they begged Jesus to place his hand on him. After he took him aside away from the crowd, Jesus put his fingers into the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue. He looked up to heaven and with a deep sigh said to him, "Ephphatha," which means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened and his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. Now, while Jesus was down here in the Decapolis, some people brought this man to him. Evidently, he had spoken before and heard before, but now he was tongue-tied and deaf. So Jesus had great compassion on this man because he took him away from the crowd. You just think, if you're deaf and you can't speak very well, something's wrong with your tongue, something's wrong with your tongue, people may laugh at you, or they may talk about you and give you like funny looks, or even just give you very sympathetic, pitiful looks, okay? So here this man is, and Jesus has compassion on him, and he takes him away from the crowd. He doesn't want this to be a spectacle. He takes him away from the crowd. And let's look at what he does again. He put his fingers into the man's ears like, okay, I know you can't understand me, but this is what I'm going to do. He uses sign language here to tell him what he's going to do for him. So he puts his fingers in his ears, okay? And then he spit and he touches the man's tongue. Now, I don't know if he spit and touched the tongue to let the man know what he was going to do, or if he used the spittle on the man's tongue. I know it's gross. I think so. But in ancient times, spittle was thought to be very healing for people. And then he looks up to heaven, and the man is watching him. He's looking up to heaven in order to let this man know who is healing him. God is healing this man. He looks up into heaven and he says, Ephphatha. Now this is another instance where Mark uses the actual Aramaic word. Again, probably because this word had such an emotional tug to it when this story was being told. And it means be opened. At this, the man's ears were opened, his tongue was loosened, and he began to speak plainly. So, now, the people that brought him, they were with him too, and Jesus commanded them not to tell anyone. But the more he did so, the more he told people, don't tell anybody about this, the more they kept talking about it. You just can't not talk about it. How did this happen? Well, it was Jesus. People were overwhelmed with amazement. Verse 37, he has done everything well, they said. He even makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. Okay. This deaf hearing and mute speaking, here's an interesting thought. Isaiah 35 verses 5 and 6 talks about the blind seeing, the ears of the deaf being unstopped, and the mute tongue shouting for joy. This is what is happening in this Gentile area. But this prophecy from Isaiah was a sign of renewal, a sign of God's love breaking through. And it is breaking through, isn't it? Right there in the Decapolis, Gentile country. All right, interesting too about Decapolis. Do you remember the last time Jesus was at the Decapolis? What happened? Remember all the pigs that were destroyed, that herd of pigs that was destroyed? What did the people want him to do? They were afraid of him, weren't they? And they begged him to leave. Now, I'm sure they're begging him to stay. They are amazed and overwhelmed. Okay. Chapter 8, verse 1. During those days, and we're talking about the days when he was here in the Decapolis, another large crowd gathered. Now, how long, your question 5, had a large crowd been with Jesus? And what did Jesus do? Let's read on. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come from a long distance. Okay, now I want you to remember the feeding of the 5,000. Who actually noticed then that the people were going to need some food soon? It was the disciples, wasn't it? And they hadn't even been there a day. Okay? These people have been there 3 days. Do you think the disciples realized that these people were going to need some food soon? They were in a very remote place. With the 5,000, there were little villages around that they could go get something to eat, but not here. Not here. But evidently, the disciples didn't notice that these people might be hungry. Who were these people? They were Gentiles. Right, so his disciples answered, "But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to eat, to feed them?" They were in a remote place. They couldn't go get anything. Verse 5. What does Jesus ask them? Okay. How many loaves do you have? They had food. Were they willing to share what food they had with some of these people? So how many loaves do you have? 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. Now, they're on the ground this time. There's not any nice green grass. It is definitely past springtime. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples. Remember, he gave thanks just like he did the last time, and he gave them to the disciples to distribute to the people, and they did so. They had a few small fish as well, like little sardine kind of fish. He gave thanks for them also, and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. Now, these basketfuls, they were different than the other ones. The other ones were called kophinos. These were called spurus, and they were bigger. They were big enough for a man to sit in. This is a drawing of when the Apostle Paul was let down from a window in a basket. All right, so the commentaries I read, though, they said, don't be too hard on the disciples. To us, it's only been 2 chapters. What? Didn't they remember about the 5,000? Well, that was just 2 chapters ago. We don't know how long it had been since the 5,000 were fed, but it must have been several months, okay? And a lot had happened since then. The compassion of Jesus for these people is still the same for us. He loves us. He knows when we need something, doesn't he? And once again, who did Jesus use to distribute the food? It was the disciples. Whose food did he use? The disciples' food. He used what they had. He gave thanks. He gave it to the disciples, and they distributed it to the people and picked up the leftovers. Same lesson, basically, as with the 5,000. All right. Question 6, when Jesus and his apostles left the remote area, where did they go? Who was there? And what did they want? All right, let's go see. After he sent them away, it was probably easier to send this crowd away. He got into the boat with the disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. So let's look here. Okay, this is the Sea of Galilee. This is south, north, east, west. Okay, we're used to looking at it like that. All right, but it's different right now. Okay. So Dalmanutha is up here around Magdala, right up here. It's on the western side, which is the Jewish side. And who did they see when they got there? Verse 11, the Pharisees. They were there. And they came and began to question Jesus. They wanted to test him. They asked him for a sign from heaven. Jesus sighed deeply. Why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I tell you, no sign will be given it. Then he left them, got back in the boat, and crossed to the other side. This lesson has lots of crossing and traveling. Have you noticed that? Okay, so they were wanting a sign from heaven. Now, had Jesus been performing the signs that the prophet said that the Messiah would perform? Yes. All of the things that were in the prophets about the coming of the Messiah, the things he would do, the signs that you could see him doing to know that he was the Messiah, that's what Jesus has been doing. But the Pharisees wanted something more. They wanted a sign from heaven. They wanted spectacular signs of grandeur, like what happened at Mount Carmel with Elijah. God rained fire on the earth and destroyed all the priests of Baal. There were hundreds of priests of Baal there. He destroyed them. They wanted to rule the world. Rule the world? You know, we've seen comics and stuff where the bad guy wants to rule the world. Well, they wanted to rule the world. Jesus specifically mentions this generation. The Pharisees and Herod wanted desperately to have an earthly kingdom and a Messiah that would help them rule the world. And Herod wanted to be the king. So they were blind to the truth. They could not seem to grasp that their notion of the kingdom was vastly different than that of God. Right. Verse 13. Then he left them, got back into the boat, and crossed to the other side. So he's up here, and now he goes to the other side, down here. The disciples had forgotten to bring bread, except for one loaf they had with them in the boat. Be careful, Jesus warned them. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod. Question 7. Why was Jesus so frustrated with his disciples in Mark 8? They discussed this with one another and said, "It's because we have no bread." That he's talking about the yeast of the Pharisees. Okay. Jesus is thinking about this altercation. It's still bothering him. And he's worried. He's not worried, but he's concerned for his disciples. And he tells them to beware, to watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees. Now, what does yeast do when you have this dough and then you mix yeast in it? What happens when that yeast is put in the dough? It changes, doesn't it? It gets bigger. So that's why Jesus is talking about this yeast, this leaven of the Pharisees, because just a few people can ruin a nation, right? So he's a bit frustrated now that the disciples are not thinking kingdom thoughts either. They are thinking of day-to-day things like bread. We do that too, don't we? We are concerned about earthly things. Jesus is focused on kingdom matters. Right. He was frustrated because they couldn't seem to even want to focus on kingdom things. But it was vital to the kingdom of God for these disciples to understand. And this is why Jesus was so frustrated with them. All right. Aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up?" 12, they replied. When I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you pick up? They answered, 7. He said to them, do you still not understand? Okay, in verse 17, when Jesus talks about them not seeing or understanding and their hearts being hard, it's thought that he was referring to Jeremiah 5, verse 21. And I'll read that to you. Hear this, you foolish and senseless people who have eyes but do not see, and who have ears but do not hear. And I want to go on down chapter 5 in Jeremiah and read verses 30 and 31. A horrible and shocking thing has happened in the land. He was prophesying about this time, this generation that Jesus was in. The prophets prophesy lies, and priests rule by their own authority. And my people love it this way. This is what is happening in that generation. Matthew tells us that the disciples did finally understand that Jesus was talking to them about the teaching of the Pharisees. That their teaching is like leaven that permeates the people. Okay. And he told them to beware of this teaching. Don't let it permeate your hearts. Remember, Jesus is teaching on your heart about things that are inside or what defile you. Jesus needs his disciples to have ears that hear and eyes that see. And he needs them to remember his miracles. Verse 21, he needs them to understand who he is. But they're letting life get out in the way, aren't they? Human things. Do we let that happen? We do. All right, they came to Bethsaida, which is down here. And some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. Your question 8, what was the first thing the blind man saw after Jesus spit on his eyes and put his hands on him? He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside the village. Again, this compassion for another person whenever he's healing him. He was blind, and maybe the crowd, it was bothering him, to hear so many noises. So he took him out of the village. When he had spit on the man's eyes, back then, there was a lot of times there was like a crustiness on a blind person's eyes. And it may be that Jesus was spitting to get that stuff off of him, okay? And he put his hands on him, and Jesus asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. So evidently He'd seen trees before. Okay. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes. Then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." Okay. Why did that happen? One thing, Mark, this is the only gospel that this story is in. So Mark put it there for a reason. Jesus healed lots of people. But this man's healing was gradual. Do we always see the truth of God immediately? No, of course not. His truth is what we learn gradually, isn't it? What about the disciples? They're not quite getting it yet, but they're learning. They're learning gradually. Would they ever understand the meaning? And then Jesus said for this man to go home, don't even go into the village, which indicates he didn't live in the village. He didn't want him to go into the village. He just wanted him to go home. And he told the man not to say anything to anybody. And evidently this man obeyed Jesus, which is shocking. Everybody else wants to tell things about him. All right. Then, 27, Jesus and his disciples went on to the villages around Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi, this is the western side of Galilee, right there, the Jewish side. And this is Caesarea Philippi right here. So they were in the Decapolis, and they started this way now. Now, let's see. These are some ruins of Caesarea Philippi, and this area here. Let me go back really quickly. There is a mountain, Mount Hermon, right here, and water comes down here and goes into the Jordan, and it cascades down from Mount Hermon, and you see it can get quite rough there. There's a trail alongside that people walk. Jesus may very well have walked right along this trail, and then for this next bit, they probably stopped somewhere like this group of people, and he taught them a little bit. They were just resting a little bit. And so he's asking them something. Your question number 9, on the way to Caesarea Philippi, what did Jesus ask his disciples, and how did Peter answer? On the way, he asked them, who do people say I am? Now, do you remember in Mark 6, us talking about that? Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others one of the prophets. So we've heard that before. But in chapter 6, he did not ask the next question. This is an important question. This is one of the most important things that happened in the Bible. But what about you? He asked, who do you say I am? Peter answered, you're the Messiah. Okay, so he asked them, who do you say I am? You are the Messiah. This was a crucial point in the ministry of Jesus. They have finally understood about the loaves. They are in the presence of the Messiah. As long as they are in the presence of the Messiah, he will take care of them. Okay? Things will be okay. And just as the blind man was finally able to see clearly, they now see clearly. In Matthew 16, verse 17, Jesus tells Peter, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. Interesting. This was not revealed to you physically, flesh and blood. This was revealed to you by God. God showed this to you. What did Jesus now begin to plainly teach his disciples, and what was Peter's reaction? All right. Verse 30. Jesus warned them not to tell anyone about him. They were not to say anything to anybody yet, although I'm sure they were bursting to do that. And he then began to teach them that the Son of Man, which is another phrase for the Messiah, must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law. And that he must be killed and after 3 days rise again. He spoke plainly about this. Okay. This was new. This was completely new. These kingdom messages have all been new. That bothered people. I want you to think, what if someone came around and started teaching new things that weren't in the Bible? What would you think? Would that be okay? It wouldn't. They had the law from God, and Jesus keeps teaching new things. New things. Difference is, they knew that the Messiah would come and would change things. Okay? So this was completely new. And it hit them like a bomb. Like an explosion. They were just, it was hard for them to take all this in. You can just imagine. They were young. They were prepared to die for him. They had always been prepared to die for him. But as a warrior. But Jesus was saying there wasn't going to be any glory on the earth. No glory. Only death. The leaders wouldn't be backing him. They would reject him, and he was going to die willingly. Okay, and you notice the part about in 3 days, after 3 days, he would rise again. They were so caught up in what they were hearing that probably just went right out the window. Okay? They were understandably upset. They were frightened. Peter's frightened, but he's like the leader, and so he sees the other disciples, and they're getting nervous, and Peter's thinking, "Are this is supposition on my part, of course. Are they going to leave? What? This okay? Something's wrong with Jesus. He's just tired. He's upset with all these Pharisees. Okay, I'm going to talk to him." So Peter takes Jesus aside and begins to rebuke him. "Jesus, you cannot do this. You cannot tell them that. You're tired. You're despondent." Verse 33. But when Jesus turned and looked at his disciples, and they're looking at him, he knows that they're thinking the same thing as Peter. And he rebukes Peter loudly. He yells at him. And he says, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." Peter is tempting Jesus right here. He's tempting him. No, you're the king. You're the Messiah. You're not going to die. We won't let you die. Do you remember in the wilderness after his baptism who Jesus met up there? Who tempted him? It was Satan. And one of the things Satan tempted him with was not having to go through this. You don't need to go through this. You are the Messiah. You are meant for glory, not death. You're the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords. And you will reign over all the earth, all the world. All you have to do is fall down and worship me, and I'll make it happen. This is what Peter is tempting Jesus with, not having to go through what he knew he had to do. And he yelled at him. Remember what he had called him earlier when Peter had said that he was the Messiah? He had been called the Rock. And it was a great day for Peter. And now, Jesus is shouting at him to get away from me. You are Satan. From a high to a really low low. And what did he say to Peter? You know, he said, you don't have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns. Jesus was human. Did he want to die like a criminal? No, he didn't. He didn't want to die on a cross. But he had to. He had to do it. Why? Because if he didn't, no one could be saved. No one. Not Peter, not his disciples, not his mother, not his family. No one living then or before him, not Moses, not Noah. No one living after could be saved. But if he did this, his sacrifice would save the world. And he knew this was his destiny to do this. This is why Satan is so powerful to humans. Because he promises us what we crave. I have to have this. Okay, you can have it. He just doesn't tell us what it's going to cost. Okay, what's going on with the disciples here? They knew he was the Messiah. I mean, they already know. They know that. But they did not understand that he was divine. He was the king. All the Jews wanted a king to reign over them. But they did not get that he was actually God. Okay, question 10. Jesus now begins teaching his disciples as well as the crowd. Now the crowd are the ones who are with Jesus. There's a crowd of his followers. He begins teaching about the cross, the way of the cross, and what it means. List at least one thing Jesus told them. Of course, we're going to go through them all. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. What? Wait a minute. you're going to take up a cross and I'm supposed to take up a cross? What? Is that what you're saying? That you're going to die on a cross and I might as well? Verse 35, for whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. Again, they were prepared to lose their life as a warrior, but to just give it up. This is hard teaching, but it's kingdom teaching. What good is it? What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, rule the world, yet forfeit their soul? Because that is what it would cost you. That's the cost. Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? You can't buy your soul back. If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man, remember Son of Man is the same as the Messiah, will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels. These are strong words, and they're scary words, aren't they? Now in chapter 9, verse 1, and he said to them, truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see that the kingdom of God has come in power. So he's telling them that there are some of them there that would see the kingdom come with power. When did that happen? Acts 2. Very powerful day. He speaks of the Son of Man coming in his Father's glory with the holy angels. Only when evil is defeated, through his suffering and death, could that happen. Soon, his followers are going to know what we know. That he did defeat evil. He did defeat death. He did defeat Satan. And is sitting right now at the right hand of God in his Father's glory with the holy angels. I'm looking forward to lesson 5 with you. Have a great day. Bye-bye now.